Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. Turkey says 33 of its soldiers were killed by a Syrian airstrike in northwestern Idlib province. The governor of Hatay province, Rahimi Doğan, says 32 others were wounded in the attack. The losses marked the highest number of fatalities suffered by Turkey in a single day since tensions escalated between Damascus and Ankara last month. This report has the details.
Tensions in Syria have been high since Turkish and Syrian forces came to blows in Idlib province, leading to hundreds of casualties. In the small hours of Friday, Turkey suffered the biggest blow yet to its campaign to secure its safe zone. As a result of the airstrikes, 33 soldiers are martyred. None of our wounded soldiers who are being treated in hospital are in critical condition. May our martyrs rest in peace. I wish speedy recovery for our wounded soldiers. In retaliation, Turkey bombed every known Syrian military target after a 6-hour-long emergency meeting chaired by President Tayyip Erdogan. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu spoke to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg over the assault. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has repeated his call for an immediate ceasefire in the region. Idlib is the last opposition-held stronghold in the country and home to 4 million civilians.
Syria says Israeli forces have killed a civilian and wounded 3 soldiers in an air attack near the annexed Golan Heights. State media says Israeli missiles targeted army positions at Katania, Al-Huriyat and the town of Quneitra. Quneitra Governor Humam Dibyat confirmed the death of the civilian. Dibyat identified the dead man as Adil Tawil and said he worked at a police station. There was no immediate comment from the Israeli military. The Israeli attack comes after a Syrian linked to the Lebanese Hezbollah was killed in a cross-border drone strike yesterday. Israel has approved the construction of nearly 1,800 illegal settler homes in the occupied West Bank. In a statement, Israel's Defense Minister Naftali Bennett said Tel Aviv will not give an inch of land to the Arabs. Anti-settlement NGO Peace Now says a total of 1,739 homes have been earmarked, most of which are deep inside the West Bank. It said 1,036 have been given first-stage approval, while 703 have received a final-stage approval. The approval of these units come 4 days ahead of the general election in Israel. The announcement also marks the latest in a recent string of promises by Israeli officials to expand the settlements, which are illegal under international law. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg are visiting Afghanistan tomorrow. This visit comes on the day of peace deal signing between the U.S. and the Taliban. Afghanistan's presidential spokesman Siddiq Siddiqui says Esper and Stoltenberg will announce a joint declaration with President Ashraf Ghani. Speaking about the peace deal, Esper confessed about the base agreement and some annexes in Afghanistan. U.S. officials have already hinted in recent past to pave way for intra-Afghan talks after Washington's deal with the Taliban. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Kabul's prosperity relies on intra-Afghan negotiations.
Tomorrow is a big day for Afghanistan and for Afghans. It's a great opportunity. Afghanistan, inshallah, is moving towards peace and reconciliation. So tomorrow can set the tone for an inclusive intra-Afghan dialogue. I wish the Afghans well. I wish Afghanistan peace and stability.
22 Republican lawmakers have expressed serious concerns about the anticipated U.S.-Taliban peace deal. In a letter to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, Congress members said the deal will jeopardize American national security interests. The Congress members, led by Liz Cheney, sought assurances that the Trump administration will not place American security at Taliban's hands. The lawmakers said U.S. troops withdrawal from Afghanistan will enable terrorist groups to grow stronger and establish safe havens. The letter said any promises made by the Taliban related to counterterrorism cannot be trusted. The Congress members asked Pompeo to ensure no intelligence is shared with the fighters. The U.S. and Taliban are expected to ink the years-long negotiated peace deal tomorrow. The death toll in riots during the anti-citizenship law protests in India's capital New Delhi has risen to 42. Hindu radicals targeted 4 mosques, 79 Muslim houses, 52 shops, 2 schools and 3 factories owned by the Muslims. Fire service officials say over 500 cars, trucks and buses were destroyed by the radicals. The US, France and Russia have issued security alert for their citizens in India due to growing incidents of mob violence by Hindu extremists. In their separate statements, the US and Russian embassies in Delhi cautioned their citizens against traveling in the country. Washington has also called on all the sides to refrain from violence and to maintain peace in the country. Protests broke out in Delhi after the ruling BJP government enacted the Citizenship Amendment Act, rendering millions of Muslims potentially stateless. The US has urged India to respect the right to peaceful assembly. The top US diplomat for South Asia, Alice Wells, called on all the sides to refrain from violence. The Democratic frontrunner, Bernie Sanders, has denounced President Donald Trump's response to the anti-Muslim mob violence in India. The US Commission on International Religious Freedom has also criticized the Indian response, voicing alarm at reports of police inaction. India has seen mass protests after Modi's Hindu nationalist government pushed forward a controversial citizenship law. In China, another 44 people have lost their lives to the new coronavirus in the last 24 hours, bringing the death toll to 2,788. Hopes to contain the virus are diminishing as the first case in sub-Saharan Africa was reported in Nigeria. More in this report.
The coronavirus scare has gripped the world as new confirmed cases of the disease reported in regions outside China continue to rise. The World Health Organization says it is alarmed at the new figures and has urged countries to prepare themselves against the spread of the disease.
The increase in the rest of the world, we will see more cases, is a bad news. And especially in 3 countries, we're seeing clusters. In Iran, in Italy, and also in Korea.
Afghanistan and Pakistan face a potential health crisis after the new coronavirus erupted in neighboring Iran. Pakistan closed its border with Iran after 2 individuals returning from the country were found to be infected. But people continue to cross between Afghanistan and Iran after the border was reopened following a temporary closure.
We have come from Tehran. As soon as we heard that the borders have been opened, we were happy. Doctors are checking travelers on the Iran and Afghanistan borders, and if the borders were not opened, we would be in trouble.
The fatal virus has now spread to 45 countries, infecting over 82,000 people. The outbreak in Europe, the Middle East and Asia have fanned fears of poor countries without the healthcare infrastructure to cope with the challenges.
Iran says its death toll from coronavirus has risen to 26 with 245 cases, including several senior officials. The Vice President for Women and Family Affairs, Masuma Ibtikar, and Deputy Health Minister Erij Harichi have also been infected. Officials say Ibtikar's case is mild and she has not been hospitalized. A lawmaker, Mahmoud Sadeghi, has also tested positive for coronavirus. The outbreak prompted authorities to call off Friday prayers in several cities, including Tehran. State media said Tehran has banned Chinese nationals from entering the country. The death rate among confirmed cases of the virus has been higher in Iran than elsewhere. The coronavirus is spreading more quickly in Europe and other parts of the world than in China. The disease was detected for the first time in Estonia, Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Greece. Greece has reported 2 new cases in the past 24 hours, bringing the total number of the confirmed cases to 3. In Switzerland, the number of confirmed coronavirus cases has risen to 4. Meanwhile, France has cancelled a big finale of a carnival in Nice that borders northern Italy over coronavirus fears. The carnival in the southern city started on 15th of February and was set for the finale on Saturday. France is on high alert and has so far confirmed 2 deaths and 18 infections due to the virus in the country. Democratic presidential candidates have held rallies across South Carolina ahead of Saturday's primary. Racial justice and healthcare took center stage as candidates try to woo the African American vote that dominates the state. More in this report.
The race for Democratic presidential nomination is gathering momentum as it enters its first decisive stretch. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders secured a critical victory in Nevada, but rivals warn his nomination could ensure U.S. President Donald Trump's re-election. Saturday's South Carolina primary is being dubbed as the first big test for early frontrunner Sanders. Sanders shelled out his message of unity and inclusiveness at a spirited campaign rally in Wofford College.
We are building a movement that cannot be stopped. It is a justice movement. It is a movement for economic justice, for social justice, for racial justice, for environmental justice. And when millions of people stand up and fight back, nothing on earth can stop us.
At a campaign rally at the Coastal Carolina University, former Vice President Joe Biden said he was the best candidate to take on Trump.
They spent $125,000 putting up ads that are flat lies to keep me from getting the nomination. I wonder why. Because if I get the nomination, I will beat him like a drum.
Leading the pre-poll service for South Carolina by a considerable margin now, Biden will hope the African American vote will help to resurrect his stuttering White House bid on Saturday.
The US says it will never recognize Russian claims of sovereignty over Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. In a statement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said February 27 marked the 6th anniversary of Russia's annexation of Crimean Peninsula. He said the Russian occupation authorities continue to violate human rights and fundamental freedoms. Pompeo said the increasing militarization of the peninsula is a threat to common security. Moscow and Kiev have been at loggerheads since Russia annexed Crimea after a controversial referendum. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Russia's ambassador to the UN, President Benzia, has urged the Security Council not to bury the Astana process. At the UNSC session, Germany, France and other countries urged Russia and Turkey to start talks in order to stop an escalation in Syria's Idlib. The Benzia said Russia is working with the Syrian government to settle existing difficulties. He said the UN Security Council should not build up political pressure. Estonia's UN ambassador Sven Jurgensen disagreed with Moscow, saying that Astana format has failed. US Ambassador Kelly Craft also accused Russia and Iran of making the situation worse in Syria. The situation in Idlib escalated again early this month after fresh attacks by the government and the military forces. Greece is tightening its border controls on land and at sea to address the flow of migrants and take tougher measures against the new coronavirus. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says border controls will be increased in accordance with the international law. Mitsotakis said he has ordered a significant increase in the number of boats and patrols around islands in the eastern Aegean Sea. The government's plan to construct new camps on the island of Lesbos and Chios to relieve overcrowding in existing facilities sparked protests. Over 1 million refugees and migrants have reached Greece since 2015, mainly coming from the Turkish mainland. Athens currently hosts over 42,000 migrants on its islands. Libya says warlord Khalifa Haftar's forces have killed 21 civilians and wounded 31 others in the last 41 days. Officials at the Field Medical and Support Center said the casualties occurred in different areas in and around Tripoli. Besides men and women, the list of casualties include children, some only a few months old. Haftar's Eastern Army has been fighting with the UN-recognized government of the National Accord to take over the capital Tripoli since April last year. The UN and some European states have called on Libya's warring parties to cease hostilities. Up till now, the sides have failed to reach a permanent agreement. The African Union has announced a temporary deployment of 3,000 troops in West Africa's Sahel region in response to a growing insurgency. AU's Peace and Security Commission Chief Samil Chirgui said the decision was taken at the organization's annual summit last month in Addis Ababa. Chirgui said the decision was prompted by the rise in the level of threat and its complexity. Last week, the UN said over 4,000 people in Burkina Faso have been forced out of their homes by a rising number of attacks on civilians. The bloodshed has escalated despite the presence of a 13,000-strong UN peacekeeping force in Mali. The UN says 4,000 people have died in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger in 2019, 5 times more than the levels of 2016.
To work on deploying a force of 3,000 troops to help the Sahel countries degrade terrorist groups. I think this is a decision that we will be working on together with the G5 Sahel and the ECOWAS.
In America's governments have resorted to a violent clampdown on hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of protesters who took to the streets in 2019. Amnesty International 2019 review says the governments used measures in flagrant disregard for their obligations under domestic and international law. Amnesty said tsunami of protests that swept across Latin America and the Caribbean last year were often met by repressive and increasingly militarized tactics. Reports said the year was marked by states' inability to channel people's discontent and demands for their rights. Amnesty noted Chilean and Venezuelan forces committed crimes and rights abuses during crackdown on the protests. Reports said U.S. government unlawfully detained children fleeing situations of violence in Central America. Amnesty warned U.S. President Donald Trump's asylum ban issued in July could be a death sentence for people seeking safety. In the U.S., California power regulators have slapped Pacific Gas and Electric with a $2.1 billion fine for igniting a series of deadly wildfires. This comes after several consumer groups protested against the initial $1.7 billion settlement. Company officials say they are disappointed by the move after working diligently for many months with multiple parties. They say the business's fundamental obligation is to safely operate its systems. The harsher punishment also includes a $200 million payment to California's general fund. The company's outdated electricity grid and negligence during the 2017 and 18 caused wildfires in which 130 people died and 28,000 homes were destroyed. A Syrian girl whose father taught her to laugh at the sound of bombs has traveled to Turkey with her family. 3-year-old Salva blew kisses to cameras as she arrived in Turkey to start a new life. This report has the details.
A week ago, a video of a 3-year-old girl's infectious laugh captured hearts around the world. Salwa's father, Abdullah Muhammad, came up with a game to help his daughter cope with the sounds of war. He encouraged her to simply laugh whenever bombs or shells landed in the vicinity.
When I know that there will be airstrikes, I immediately take out my phone and tell her to come. Let's take photos and so on. I turn the matter into a game so that she won't be afraid. Because if she was alone and saw that her mother is afraid and her father is afraid, then she will definitely be afraid.
Muhammad noted that many children suffer psychological hardships and stress due to daily airstrikes. He wanted to avoid Salva suffering the same scars of war. He said that he managed to convince his daughter that these noises are similar to the sounds of fireworks. Salva and her family have since been invited to live in Turkey. Muhammad has thanked the Turkish government for its support.
The World Bank has restored relations with Somalia after a 30-year break, paving way for the country to have access to low-cost development aid. Contact was severed in 1991 as the country descended into conflict, facing violence from militant groups. World Bank Vice President for Africa, Hafiz Ghanem, said Somalia has made important reforms to drive the economy forward. Somalia has won initial approval from the World Bank and the IMF to get hundreds of millions in debt relief. Somalia's Finance Minister, Abdurrahman Bele, said the approval is a recognition of the government's efforts to improve country's economic situation. Almost 70% of Somalis live on less than $2 a day. RollsRoyce has reported operational losses of over $1 billion for 2019. In a statement, the company said 2019 losses have fallen from nearly $4 billion recorded in 2018. The company said the rollout of the technical fixes for the Trent 1000 is progressing well, with further measures underway to reduce customer disruption. It expects core operating profit to grow by about 15% this year, with at least £1 billion of fresh cash flow. The company has been working to resolve durability issues with its Trent 1000 engine, which powers Boeing's 787 Dreamliner. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.